Today we want to talk to you about improving the quality of your HR information. This is a subject I think doesn't get the attention it deserves from everyone in the HR world, both from vendors, consultants out there, and HR practitioners itself. At Navigo, we work with a lot of HR departments, and sort of the systems tend to be the big focus in operational HR, which is the area we play a lot in. Often we find, while the systems are a cause of angst and improvement, it's often the processes and the people systems around that, around the technology, that needs the focus. And one of these areas is HR information management. And what that is making sure you manage your data, knowing what elements around people, jobs, positions need to be captured and curated, where it lives, who has access to it, how it can be created and maintained, how it relates to other information, and what rules govern its use. And it sounds like a big job, but it's not once you have that discipline of focusing on this information. Better HR information will make your life easier, from things like being able to produce reports quicker, better decision making because you have more accurate information there to base your decisions on, reducing payroll and processing errors, speeding up some of the major batch processes in your HR payroll systems, making it easy to put new technology into HR, and reducing the amount of operational HR work. So it all sounds great, and that's what we want to take you through today. So today, in today's webinar, myself and my colleague Belinda Walsh. Hi, Belinda.
Hi, everyone.
We will talk about the tips, tools, and practices for better HR data accuracy. A couple of little housekeeping tasks to mention. You can hear us, but we can't hear you. If you do have a question, you can use your little control panel to raise your hand and ask us a question if there's anything you want to ask us. So today our presenters are myself, Peter Forbes, and Belinda Walsh, our senior consultant at Navigo. I'm the managing director of Navigo and have about nearly 20 years working in HR and HR systems. I've spent a lot of my consulting days pushing HR and payroll information around, including on working on HRIS implementations, reporting projects, system upgrades, and integrations. At Navigo, I lead a great team of HR technology professionals who help organisations. We have a couple of awesome HR solutions that solve targeted problems, and a HR services arm that focuses on HR technology strategy and operational HR issues. Belinda Walsh, presenting with me today, is one of our senior consultants who specialises in our HR solutions, and in particular our HR visualisation tools, including Org+. And more recently, she's been working on our employee onboarding solution, HR Onboard. Through her experience implementing Org+, Belinda's worked at a who's who of corporate Australia and working with a vast number of related HR payroll systems, trying to visualise the information within. Today, she brings that experience to talk about data accuracy and how to improve the quality of your HR information. So, welcome, Belinda.
Thank you, Pete, and thank you for everyone joining us today. I'm excited to have this opportunity to tell you about my top tips for HR data accuracy. This is a webinar that I did promise to everyone in my last webinar, which was on HR reporting in October last year. And I'm glad that I'm finally able to share with you my information on this. So basically, I want to share with you my experiences with assisting organisations that initially had an unknown number of data issues to begin to use tools to assist them to find and resolve issues in their data. Using these tools, they had a much clearer picture of how big the problems were and a faster approach to resolving them. So with more accurate data, the reports and analytics that they obtained, they could use that to basically be more valuable in their organisation. So during my time at Navigo, I have seen both extremes in accuracy of HR data. So on one extreme, the organisation had very accurate and clean data, and they were easily able to report on this data. This extreme is a dream for most organisations. And then on the other extreme, one of the customers had no source of truth for their data, and there was actually a huge project in place to cleanse that data to make it more accurate. And unfortunately, this can be a reality for a number of organisations. However, I do find in most cases that the customer's data generally has at least a couple of data elements that they don't consider to be very accurate or needs to be worked on. So in my time, I've come across a number of different data validation challenges and goals, and basically this is what I'm going to go through today and show you some different ideas on how to do that. So firstly, let's start by looking at why we need to manage our data.
Awesome, thanks Belinda. So at Navigo, we like to think in HR there exists a discipline for HR information management, one that's probably not very well practiced or considered. In my consulting time, I've done a lot of system and operational reviews in HR payroll departments, and a lot of the issues focus around data, or I like to call it information, because the information has meaning, data does not in my books. And there's many reasons why it's important to practice this. The big one is what we've seen over the last 10 years is with the rise of self-service in HR applications, that employees, line managers can do their own transactional type HR tasks. And of course, this relies on your position-to-position hierarchy to be immaculate. You need to make sure that when you put a leave booking in, it's going to go to your line manager. If your line manager is not there, it's going to escalate up to the manager and so on and so forth. And having, in our experience, that position-to-position hierarchy is one of the most important data sets you need to have accurate. The other reason why it's important is the more accurate your information is, it reduces time and rework. And this is particularly important for payroll. Things like having incorrect payroll tax codes can generate a whole bunch of issues, timely probably around this time of year when you're starting to produce payment summaries. So, those bad setup of codes against the position or the employee, or you're just using the wrong codes, can have a real problem when you generate payment summaries and you need to reconcile that back to the right buckets of pay codes and things like that. Another issue is moving to new systems. When you're about to swap and replace a new HR payroll system or go to a new talent management, having an understanding of what's clean and what's dirty in your system really impacts the speed of going to those new systems. And usually this is where a lot of effort then goes into cleaning up the data. There's a big project, like we can't go to this new system because there's so many old records. This can even impact things like licensing, because a lot of systems, like for our system, Org Plus and Visio, it's licensed on how many records you're bringing in. And if you've got a lot of old data that's bad, potentially you're paying more in license costs that you should be doing. Statutory reporting is a pretty clear one. There's a lot of statutory reports you need to be doing that rely on good information. Tracking KPIs is a really good one. For a lot of HR directors, they have a few key metrics or KPIs, for a fancy word, in their head about what's important they have to measure about their workforce. And look, you can't improve what you can't measure is the old saying. And, I've seen HR departments literally put 2 people each month for 2 weeks to be producing their end-of-month reports out to the different business units and heads of business units and line managers. And that's because a lot of that information is dispersed across a lot of different systems. But why they bother to spend that effort is because the metrics are important for the business. They're key metrics. So the quality of your information is really important to make sure the metrics you're looking at are accurate. The last reason is really interesting, and this is a trend that's just is being driven in the consumer world, and that's the rise of analytics and big data. The technology, particularly in the last 5 years, has just grown so much about the ability for software to have complex algorithms to solve or to work out compelling insights about your business and your workforce. And there's a whole plethora of new tools coming through. If people attended our product demo on Visio, which is a cloud-based business intelligence tool, they would have seen some of the predictive analytics that tool has the capability of. If you look in the consumer world, you think about Apple's iTunes with their Genius recommendations for music. Amazon, if you're buying books through Amazon, there's this great recommendation service that automatically tells you what you should be doing based on your history. Anyone who has an Android phone is probably familiar with the Google Now application that Belinda relies on. And basically, this is a predictive tool that looks at your calendar, looks at your contacts, looks at where you are from a GPS perspective and kind of says, hey, you're going to be late for your next meeting because you're like 20 kilometers away and it takes 50 minutes to get there. This analytics, predictive data, all these types of new cool technology depends on the quality of the data in your systems. So it's really important that that's accurate. So let's have a look at what are some of the common problems with HR data. Again, going back to our Minecraft theme, this is some Minecraft renderings that big Minecraft universe create, and some monsters in that universe. So code management. This is a one I see a lot of. There's a lot of the common HR payroll systems are very code heavy. Whether that's just lookup codes, gender and locations, through to payroll codes, leave accrual codes, GL codes. I mean, it's just endless. And then there's relationships between those codes. Some systems call them code rules, but there's a whole relationship and ecosystem around that. Typically what happens is there's naming conventions that get used in those codes. This is what we call a specific standard payroll code to overtime, to long service leave, that sort of thing. Over time, those conventions can get broken or antiquated. Old codes, new codes get created, old codes get decommissioned, but they don't get end dated. And look, that whole code management becomes a real issue because as new HRIS administrators come in, they don't know the historic decisions and some of the legacy configuration that's being put into there, and that creates a real problem. And we'll talk about later how you can enforce some discipline into those areas. The other big issue is source of truth issues and having no defined or multiple sources of truth. And this is the easiest way to break your data, is having it spread across a couple of systems. This issue is problematic, particularly where payroll is outside of the HR. And so payroll sits in finance and HR is within HR, obviously. If there's one system, it makes it a little bit easier to manage. So if you have Chris 21, using it for payroll and HR, makes it a little bit easier. But where you might be using, say, an Alesco for payroll and then an Oracle e-business for your HR, questions arise over what is the master set of employee data and who's the slave. And, sometimes you ask HR and they think it is. Typically, payroll wins out because it's payroll that it's essential to have the most accurate data. And if you ask me where the master source of truth for core HR data records, it should be payroll. But splitting that over multiple systems and this is where sometimes spreadsheets come into play. There's a spreadsheet with this information. That's a big problem when you're trying to manage your HR info. Belinda, tell us about that hierarchy.
Sure. So that hierarchy is probably a pretty obvious one, really. Basically, with the business constantly changing, obviously the hierarchy changes to move with that, especially with people changing occupancies and having different temporary positions and things like that. So it can be difficult to maintain your hierarchy throughout your business. The next one is also missing or inaccurate records. So this can be a common issue since HR departments may not have been collecting particular pieces of data, and then all of a sudden want to start reporting on it, so then they start to collect it and obviously need to retrospectively collect it as well. So an example of this is occupancy information, and I've seen this one a bit where, again, people are on temporary positions and they need to, they're not updated in the system, or they're outdated in the system, but that they're not put back into their old role, and just keeping that up to date can be a bit of a challenge for some organisations. Also, as I mentioned, adding in new pieces of information. So organisations may want to start looking at things like position salary information or salary bands for different positions that they didn't previously store, and just basically trying to get that information and store it somewhere can be a bit of a challenge. Back to you, Pete, for mutant records.
Mutant records, I like this one. This is one, basically mutant records get created when your system crashes or breaks, and a good example here is if new hires. If a couple of the HR payroll systems have like new hire chains, and for whatever reason, your computer dies, the power goes out, your network drops, and you crash out halfway through a process. What happens in the back end is there's incomplete records sitting in tables. So what you might have is an employee record, but there's no job or occupancy record associated to that. Look, sometimes this isn't a problem, but other times, if you're doing things like auto increment of employee numbers, position numbers, that sort of thing, there'll be a big gap in some of those sequences because of these mutant records, and they can start to affect performance, like historical data. When I was doing with this webinar, one thing I thought about was a lot of the local HR payroll systems, at the database level, the referential integrity, that is the rules to ensure bad data doesn't come in, is usually not at the database level. It's at the screen level, at the user interface level. So down at the database level, there is ways of bad data getting into your system. And look, everyone has that element. Sometimes you can ignore this, but this can also affect some of your reports. Like if you're trying to do a headcount report and you're picking up some of these mutant records, which is going to distort the truth about where you actually are. Historical data is maybe not be a problem, but it's something you need to understand about, because our research from the HR Tech Survey that we do each year, the average age of a HR payroll system is 7 years. And a lot of people have their systems in for 10 years or so. And there's a lot of historical data in those systems. And this can start to affect your major batch processes in these systems, like your payroll, your pay run, your GL processing, or your leave accruals processing, or even your data warehouse extracts. And the quickest way to speed up any of those batch processes is to clean up and archive your old data. Because if we don't, if a payroll engine doesn't have to look through a table with, 5 to 10 million records in it, and you can reduce that down by 2/3, it's going to be a lot quicker. It's the cheapest way to get performance tuning than anything else you can do, pretty much. So you ask yourself the question, do you need this information?
Okay, so I'm sure we're all aware now that you have some form of data cleansing that you need to do. So we're going to do a quick poll to see if we can get an idea as to where everyone believes their data issues lie. So Pete, can you bring up the poll?
Yep, should be up there. So if people want to start voting and see what are the big problems. So we'll just give that another 10 seconds or so for people. You can do multiple choice on this poll, I'm pretty sure. And I'll give it a few more seconds. People are madly clicking away. My guess, it'd be interesting to see what my guess was compared to what people are saying. Okay, so that's pretty good. We'll a couple more seconds because I can see people going. We got 90% of the audience voted, which is awesome. I'll close the poll and share the results. Ooh, so you can't see it. Can you see that? There you go, doing it. Okay, so the biggest one is missing information and source of truth, which is, yeah, look, source of truth I would have predicted. I would have thought bad hierarchy was going to be more.
I was going to say missing information I do see a lot with different.
Is that the one you see?
Yeah, because as I said, there's some things that just aren't proactively updated and maintained. So
yeah, and I think that reflects like as businesses changes. So all of a sudden they say, hey, we're going to record this piece of information about an occupancy. We're going to use this field in the system, but there's no, there's no retrospective updating of that. And how do you maintain it if staff leave? How do you maintain, well, this is what this field needs? Because a lot of the applications, it's really hard to enforce those rules. Cool.
Okay, so we're going to go through now our golden rules for cleansing your data. So the very first one is that you should work with your dirty data while you're improving it. So there's so many times I've heard customers tell me that they just need to clean their data first, and then they're going to get this reporting tool. And basically I want to say that that's the wrong approach to take. You're much better off getting the reporting tool first, and then you're actually able to use that tool to help you cleanse your data. I think it's a lot easier to be able to cleanse it when you can visually view your data as opposed to trying to do it a more manual way. The second one is don't cleanse for cleansing's sake. So you basically don't want to give yourself more work than you need to. So with data cleansing, you want to spend time on things that are actually going to make a difference. So at any point in time, there's probably a large number of projects that you're actually working on. And the reality is that data cleansing or validation projects are going to be the lowest priority for the business. So it's better to focus on things that are going to make the biggest impact initially, and then you can work on the smaller things as you improve, basically. Okay, so the next golden rule we have is aiming for accuracy instead of perfection. So I think in some cases the 80-20 rule applies here, that sometimes if you're looking at particular pieces of information like demographic data for something like a long service, if you're trying to get tenure sort of analytics, close enough will be good enough, especially to start off with. Since the reality is the difference is probably only going to be a few % here or there, and that difference won't be big enough to make any change business decisions, have any impact on that. However, there is some information that 100% accuracy is required, and that's for something like payroll data, where obviously that needs to be perfect. Okay, Pam, I'm going to pass on to you for the next one.
Okay, the other one, which I think is a good tip, is fixing the root cause and not the symptom. Because what you really want to do here is Band-Aid fixes really are just wasting your time. And look, there's so many, and I say this to my guys about, fighting fires and being proactive rather than reactive. You really need to go back and attack the root cause and try and solve the issue so it doesn't come back again. So an example in the HR payroll world is like if new payroll codes are popping up in your system like weeds. And if that's the case, you might want to look at limiting who has access to create those codes, or putting in a process about what needs to happen, what are the business decisions we need to think about before codes are being created in the system. Is there something we can reuse already that could do that or slightly modify? You need to be asking yourself these sort of questions before you make actions, because there's a lot of flow-on effects and impacts of those. One good technique of fixing the root cause is using the 5 whys approach to determine what's really the root cause of an issue. And if you don't know what the 5 whys are, maybe Google it and you'll see. But basically, you ask why 5 times to any question to really drill down. It's a good analytic practice to get into. And the last rule is don't do it all yourself. So there's a lot of elements in your workforce information that you can get employees to assist in validating and correcting. And the trendy word for this is crowdsourcing, especially if they're viewing this information in a self-service type app or an org chart as well. And org charts are great for this as well. So what you should be doing is allow them to submit changes themselves to HR, not back to the source of truth, but back to the HR department, who can then validate whether that's change legitimate or not, but it gives you a constant feedback loop about improving your data. And, 1,000 eyes are better than one in this type of information. A good example of this is this screen that you can see we've got up here now. When we do a lot of org charts, we provide a link on the org chart box or the little profile box about that particular position that, if there's something wrong, click here and this screen might appear. And what this allows anyone to do in the organization basically is to go, this information's wrong, click submit, and that would then go back to HR. So it's a way to flag inaccurate information in your system and allowing the people in your organization to flag it. So it'd be interesting to see how many self-service applications allow you to look at information that you might not necessarily have access to change, but allows you to flag that there is a problem. And this is just this continuous feedback loop you want to have going.
Okay, so now that we've covered our recommendations on data cleansing, I'm going to show you a few examples of how tools can be used to assist with the data cleansing process. Okay, so my first example is basically just viewing the hierarchy data in a visual way to easily be able to quickly identify issues. So it always amazes me how excited customers get when they first view their HR data in the form of an organisational chart. Now, it's not that they've never seen an organisational chart before, especially of their company data, it's that they haven't seen it directly feeding from their HR or payroll system.
What usually happens, it devolves into a big conversation and argument.
Exactly, yes. So everyone sits there and analyses the data, and we hear things like, Mary's reporting to the wrong person, or why is Joe showing in that position? He hasn't been in that role for a couple of weeks. So the fact is, it's actually a really good way to visually see that data and identify those data.
And does this come back to why you should be putting these tools in, even if you have bad data? Because it starts the conversation, and it puts focus on it. And what gets focused on gets fixed.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great way to just get things started, and it doesn't matter how bad the data is, because that way you can slowly, incrementally improve it as you go. So I suppose the other side to that is that sometimes with your data you have broken hierarchy, and visually that can be really hard to see because they're broken off into other areas. So this is actually known as orphans, which is a horrible name, I don't like it. But basically it's when you haven't got a manager, or the manager you have isn't in the data, and there's basically a break in that hierarchy data. And so when that happens, it can be really hard to identify that data. So it's really good if you can have some sort of report that can identify those orphans for you. So there's basically some reports available within AllPlus itself that can give you a list of all your orphans in your data, or give you a list of all the orphans without a manager, so you can easily identify them. And having that list helps you work out what data elements need to be cleaned up, because they may not have a manager for a number of reasons, like they're not in the system, they've been end-dated, or there's an incorrect data value somewhere.
And can I just say, there's a couple of big hierarchies in HR payroll. It's position to position is probably the biggest. Org unit to org unit, or some systems call them company levels, that sort of thing. There are other hierarchies where there's parent-child relationships, and and GL codes tend to have a structure as well. So visualization tools like org charting tools like AllPlus are really good to put that information in and see where the breaks in that information are, and fix it really quickly. To get that workflow and approval chain, impeccable.
Yeah, definitely. We have actually had a few customers who are doing a C-level or org unit restructure use the visual tool to help them identify the changes that they needed to make within the data. So it's very powerful for that. Okay, moving on to another example, which is highlighting issues in the data. So I have had a number of customers that have had an issue with their FTE values in the system. Now, the example I've got on the screen at the moment basically has Jessica highlighted in with a red border, showing that her employment type is different to her FTE value. So obviously she's part-time and her FTE is at 1. probably slightly different to that, but a common example is when you've got a position FTE and an occupant FTE and they don't match. And the biggest issue with that is often that some organisations use a position FTE for budgeting purposes, so they know this department may have 20 FTE in total allocated, and there's some positions that are 0.5 and they're putting a full-time resource in that position, obviously basically overspending on that in that way. So basically this report is a really good way just to visually identify things like that.
And it's putting your business rules in as well, because you'll have specific rules about relationships either between positions and occupancies, or even between elements in a position. Like if it's this location, then the admin location needs to be this, or the pay scale, or the award classification.
Yeah, exactly. And that's probably the true point about it, is that it can be very, very detailed and very specific on the types of rules and things that you want to implement to really help highlight those data problems. Okay, so this next example looks at event dates. So this is interesting and can be used a couple of different ways. This one's highlighting both probation end dates and contract end dates. So initially this could be used to be proactive and know in advance when someone's probation date or contract end date is coming up. And that way you can basically decide, do you want to retain that employee or not, and you've got the decision there. Alternatively, it could also be used to highlight when someone's contract date has ended, but they're still in the system. So you're aware that there's obviously could be problems with them still getting paid, which I've heard a few stories of customers saying ex-employees continually getting paid afterwards because that hasn't been handled properly in the system. Another example of that is not just from a pay perspective, it can also be from an asset perspective. So I've also heard stories of customers that have had things that given out like laptops, mobile phones and company cars, and since it wasn't being tracked and no one was actually monitoring those items, they've been given to the wrong people or the employees kept them. So
that's a good story.
I've heard those stories. So basically that's something else that you could visualise to try and prevent those things from happening.
And just while you're talking about end date reports, because a good tool in a lot of HR payroll systems is the email alerts, where you can set it up to check for end dates, okay, there's a probation coming up or there's a contract renewal. And they're good, what I'd call leading indicators. So they're checks that happen in advance of a particular event. Something like the end date report is also a good lagging indicator. So you can check, okay, it was meant to happen, but again, did it happen? And this is a good example of that.
Definitely. Okay, so my final example is the missing data report. So I actually created this for a customer during the restructure project. However, they basically didn't have a source of truth of their data and their data was everywhere. So they wanted a basic report to be able to identify some key information missing from their data set. So this example on the screen shows you or highlights when their employee name is missing, their employee number is missing, their position number is missing, and also with both their position and employee number, they had rules in place to say that those numbers had to be 8 characters long. They had a history of old conventions of position and employee numbers and basically wanted to identify where it hadn't been updated in the data properly. And finally, you can see FTE there as well. So they had a lot of FTE data missing, and this just helped to highlight to them, this employee hasn't got an FTE value, we need to incorporate that as well. So hopefully this gives you a bit of an idea about the things you can do. This isn't refined to just those examples. You can really put in any piece of information and highlight it from there. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to the common tools that can be used. And obviously there's a number of different tools depending on what you're going to do. The first and probably the most common one is Microsoft Excel or some form of spreadsheet. And look, with a lot of things, it can be really handy if you're very experienced with things like formulas and conditional formatting.
The most commonly used business tool in the world.
Yeah, definitely. And I've been in organisations where they are really very efficient with formulas and conditional formatting, and so it can work for them well in that way. However, I have also experienced where there is a very large data set. They actually needed to have almost a supercomputer that was fast enough to be able to run those formulas because there was just so much data for it to try and compute. The other issue that I think everyone will be aware of as well is your HR data in the Excel spreadsheet is not the most secure thing in the world. There's I know you can put passwords and things on it, still not as secure as a HR system, so something to be aware of. The next tool is using something like an org charting tool like Org Plus. So all the examples I've given you today are using Org Plus, and that way it's just a more of a visual way to identify those issues in different departments and teams. So that can be really handy as well.
So visualization tools are good, and going on to that, other tools are like business intelligence and analytical tools. They are visualization tools, but why they're good in some cases is that it gets you to worry about the information that really matters, because when you're talking about analytics and what are the key KPIs or the key metrics that really affect our organization, whether that's turnover, time to hire, you're looking at FTEs or gender balances across different business units. With the BI tool, it kind of gives you the priority on what you need to fix, because there's some bad data in your system that, look, it probably doesn't matter. And like we were saying before, it's never going to be a priority. There's much more burning issues in HR than fixing up some old codes that have never been end dated. So you want to look at the problems that have the biggest business impact, and implementing BI and analytic tools are a good way to really think about what's important to the business in terms of information management. And the other best tool to use is your HR system itself. Running a lot of reports, using the default reports in the system is obviously going to show you something. But also looking at other tools that can help. A lot of HR systems have an ability to put in your own business rules around validation of data. I know, for example, the Alesco HRS has what they call business rule triggers. And what this allows you to do is put in business rules between data elements that are specific to your organization. So if there's a relationship between a lookup field against a position and an occupancy, you can physically configure the system to say, instead of giving you 8 codes of a possibility to enter against like the location field of an occupant, it will filter it down to 3 codes because it's based on this position record. And that's a way of putting in things that stop bad data from getting into the system at the start according to your rules. And there's ways you can configure that even go right down to the database level. So if you've got other systems integrating into your system, pushing data in, those business rules will also be applied. So there is a lot of good tools built into a lot of now, the modern day HR payroll systems to allow you to make sure only good data comes in. Okay, so key takeaways, I guess, today. We've covered a fair bit of area around HR information management, but to me, I think the key takeaways are, does your HR payroll department have a focus on HR information management? And, we mentioned this, what gets focused gets fixed. I think it's really, the responsibility of HR systems and the operations teams to make HR information management a focus, to come up with a discipline and policies and an attitude about, what's important in that department. What data do we really want to make a priority for getting clean? Come up with policies about code management. Come up with routine housekeeping scripts that look for bad data. This might just be a weekly or monthly report that's looking for invalid data in your system. And think about how you can prevent it happening again. So doing that root cause analysis. I like to talk about, I think HR systems management is a profession in itself because it's a real mix between HR and technology. And I like to talk about HR systems husbandry, which is basically good practices around being a HR system administrator. And I don't think there's enough spoken about this, either in HR departments or in the vendor world, because they're very specific about their products and not general HR systems practices. And it's something we're really looking at Navigo, talking to the customers we help about promoting that discipline within HR, regardless of whether it's Chris 21 or Let's Go or Ryan or any of the others. The last takeaway is about using crowdsourcing to help you engage your workforce to keep information accurate. I always think about LinkedIn when I talk about this, and if you wanted the best source of truth about your workforce's qualifications, their skills, their job history, it's LinkedIn. Why? Because the people are encouraged to keep this up to date. It's in their best interest. That information is more accurate than any internal system you're going to have. So think about how you can use crowdsourcing to flag bad data and how they'd come across that. So even if that's a phone directory, so it's not necessarily the self-service, you've got a corporate phone directory. Is there some way for people to say, hey, this is not right? How do I make HR aware of it? So there are key takeaways. So thank you for coming today to our Minecraft-inspired webinar. What we'd like to do now is see if anyone's got any questions they might want to ask. Anything we haven't covered properly. We've got a couple of minutes for questions, and I'll just bring up my little question box. So I'll see if anyone's here. We are recording this webinar, so if anyone did come in late or anything like that, there is a recording of this. We do have a question here from Wendy, who's saying our 4 key areas of HR reporting are turnover, headcount, absenteeism, and WHS, which I'm assuming stands for work health and safety, like not health and safety. Do you have any recommend any other key areas? Look, I think these key areas are really industry focused. When you look at HR metrics and analytics, there's kind of an industry standard. There's about 300 defined HR metrics out there that are kind of what they call industry standard, and they cover all areas of the life cycle. I think it really depends on what industry and what sort of business you're in. Yeah. What's important.
Definitely. I think it's got to do with a lot of the focus of the organisation. They're probably good starting points, and if you're reporting on those, then you might, it's about being aware of what the issues of business are facing at the moment and basically drawing on that and trying to focus on those data points. So I think there's no golden rule for everybody. Everyone's different, and there's different pieces of data they need to focus on.
Cool. One of the other questions we're getting is, do you know of any HR payroll systems where you can put our own validation on forms and screens to prevent bad data entry? I know for sure there's a feature in Alesco called Custom Business Rules, I think it's called, and I'm pretty sure in Chris 21 there's also functionality. But look, check with your vendor. In our experience, and probably everyone here knows this, that there's a lot of functionality that's underutilized in these systems. And I guess it's, again, it's the time and effort to put those functionality in, but something like, putting the filters and the checks on preventing bad data coming in is probably worth the effort. Okay, so I think that's about it, and that's all we have time for. 45 minutes is usually a good time for a webinar. Thank you everyone for coming today. The recording of this webinar will be posted up onto the Navigo blog later today at blog.navigo.com.au, where you can get a recording of this webinar. Thank you, Belinda, for your help today. And thank you everyone, and we'll be posting up our next webinar out within the next couple of weeks, so look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks a lot and have a great day.